when it comes to like a flood or any kind of traumatic event that we'll be seeing more of because of climate change, you are in a better position in every way to protect your baby from any kind of catastrophe, like when we had the formula crisis, and it was really hard for women in America, probably in Jamaica, to get formula. Well, if you're breastfeeding, of course, that's not an issue, but say there's a flood and there's a, boil water notice, but your electricity has gone out. You can't boil water for the formula, but your milk is sterile. And okay, so you're protecting your baby and yourself.
Hi everyone, or greetings everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Caribbean Climate Calabash, a podcast where we share stories and discuss topics of concern about climate change and our everyday lives. My name is Candice Stewart and I am your host today. And today we are joined by two lovely guests, Simeca Alexander Williamson and Catherine Toms. But before we get into introducing these two ladies, I'll very briefly introduce myself. As I said, I'm Candice Stewart. I'm Jamaican. I'm a writer. I'm a communicator. And I'm also one of 15 Caribbean writers and journalists, a part of Climate Tracker's second cohort of the Climate Justice Fellowship. So right now I'm just going to get into introducing our two lovely guests. One is based in Florida and the other is based in Jamaica. I'm going to start off with Catherine. So Catherine is a public health physician with experience designing programs aimed at reducing maternal and infant mortality. She leads a new South Florida-based program called Green Cars for Kids, which provides free transportation to non-emergency healthcare for low-income expectant mothers and kids using an all-electric fleet. Before leading Green Cars for Kids, Catherine was Senior Advisor for Climate and Health for the international nonprofit Healthcare Without Harm, where she helped Florida's health systems become more sustainable and resilient. As a steering committee member with Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, Catherine educates other health professionals and the public about the health impacts of climate change and advocates for equitable solutions, promoting clean energy and healthy communities. Catherine is especially concerned about the health impacts of extreme heat, very hot, on vulnerable populations, including expectant mothers. That's a lot. Big up, Catherine. So now we're going to move on to Simeca. Simeca Alexander, Jamaican, Alexander Williamson, beg your pardon. She holds a bachelor's in Dietetics and Nutrition and a Master of Public Health with a focus on health management. With an innate passion for nutrition, health, and wellness, and the way the body responds to food, she holds a position working assiduously to advance policies as the Advocacy Officer for the Global Health Advocacy Project under the Heart Foundation of Jamaica. She's a member of the National Infant and Young Child Feeding Program and works very closely with the Early Childhood Commission to ensure the nutrition standards are paramount. She's one of two international board-certified lactation consultants in Jamaica and practices at a number of organizations such as Caribbean Thoughts to Teens and She Women's Wellness Center located in Kingston. Simeca is also the director of Cradle of Life Limited and Cradle of Life Foundation, where she continuously assists breastfeeding moms and their newborns. Simeca, being a newborn mom herself, is happily married. She also has a 4-year-old son. Okay, introductions out of the way. Welcome, ladies, and thank you so much for joining me. Again, our topic or discussion really is about the relationship between climate change and breastfeeding. How are you? How you feel? You feeling hot? How is the climate or the temperature where you're located? Catherine, you can start.
It's been hot this summer, the hottest on record in Miami-Dade County and across the globe. So it's very hot, but it is probably similar in Jamaica. It is very humid. So we've had a lot of precipitation and everybody's wondering why. And so that's why we're here to talk today about how our climate is changing and how we as human beings have played an enormous role in this rapid global warming, and more importantly, how important every single one of us is to solutions. And it's not a lost cause, and all we really need to do is commit and act. Each of us have a lot of power to make a difference. So I'm so excited, Candice, to be here with you and Simeca and to talk about this. So I'll pass it on over to you again.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Simeca, what about you? So what's the weather like, the temperature like in your neck of the woods, even though we're in the same country?
Well, I have 2 fans on me right now and all the windows open. 1 fan is not enough anymore. And I'm breastfeeding as we speak because she's thirsty every second because of how hot the time is. So that if that's not a testament to what we're going through right now, and very appropriate for the discussion that we'll be having today, I don't know what else is. But I'm sure that my 2 fans are in working order. None of them will pop down on me today. So we should be fine.
All right, Catherine, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jamaican lingo, but when Simeca said pop down, she means that she hopes her fan doesn't stop working, because it's so hot.
Okay, thanks for cluing me in on that one.
All right, cool. So before we get into the questions, I just wanted to read a few lines from a UNICEF case study that came out of the 2020 World Breastfeeding Week that I believe it stood out for me, and it's relevant for the conversation. So it says, breastfeeding builds climate resilience and it supports long-lasting sustainable food practices. Research shows that breastfeeding influences energy demands associated with breast milk substitutes and helps to lessen the environmental impact of food alternatives, including greenhouse gas emissions. Breastfeeding also requires less water and natural resources than formula and emits a lower carbon footprint, right? So I think that's a pretty good way to kind of segue into the first question, which really is to educate our listeners and for those who may be watching, what is breastfeeding and the importance of breastfeeding. Simeca, you can take it on first and then hand over to Catherine.
Okay, so breastfeeding, and I have to make the disclaimer because I have so many different definitions out there now, but breastfeeding is actually just feeding from what comes from the breast, because we would refer to exclusive pumping persons as breastfeeding as well. So your body makes milk. Once you remove milk from the breast, whether by pumping or by the baby drinking directly, then that is breastfeeding. The importance of breastfeeding is that it provides the perfect nourishment for the child from birth. You don't have to give anything else. So you were talking about the reduced need for water. In those first 6 months, it is encouraged to not give the baby anything else but breast milk for those first 6 months. So once the baby gets to 6 months now and you start introducing complementary foods, then that is when you can start to introduce water. Breastfeeding has also shown, the research has shown where it helps they have a higher IQ, they'll be less likely to develop illnesses such as eczema, asthma, and all of those other things because of the autoimmune and the antibacterial properties of breast milk. So breast milk is just nature's perfect way of ensuring continuity of life and making sure that that infant is protected once it is that they are being breastfed. And when I say nothing else but breast milk for the first 6 months, that's what we more recognize as exclusive breastfeeding.
All right, great. Catherine?
Well, one thing I wanted to just start off, because I know raising children, giving birth, and breastfeeding, and the whole experience through adulthood, it is a very personal experience, and we all feel very vulnerable. So I know in my experience advocating for breastfeeding, you can so easily, when you advocate it, make other mothers or women who are making tough decisions feel a little ostracized. So I want to start with a bit of a caveat that life is a journey, and if you don't breastfeed, or you choose not to, or you can't for whatever reason, that's fine. There's so many ways to be a good mom, and there are so many challenges in being a mother that, that's okay. But we are here to tell you the facts and to advocate for what's best for your health and for your baby. And hands down, it is breastfeeding. I mean, a lot of it is just common sense, right? We've been breastfeeding, since we were Homo sapiens, and we're mammals. So all mammals breastfeed. That's one of the 5 defining measurements of what makes up a mammal. We all breastfeed. So the unique thing about us, and I just think this is so wonderful, we tailor make our breast milk to our baby, and not just our specific baby, but our baby as it's growing. And Simeca is shaking her head. She knows this even better than I do. She's an IBCLC. They're wonderful. And so our body tells them what they need those first few hours when they're breastfeeding. We're not really producing milk. We're producing important antibodies and signals to them, and they signal back to us. So it's this beautiful orchestra between mother and baby that goes on the whole time of breastfeeding, where we're tailor making that milk to them, and we are sort of a filter for any kind of pathogen. So not only the bugs that we've been exposed to, the bacteria and the viruses throughout our lives, we're producing antibodies that we've already built to them. But if we're exposed to something new, and we might get sick, if we're breastfeeding, we can give them antibodies quicker than their immune system, which is very new and developing, can do. So when it comes to like a flood or any kind of traumatic event that we'll be seeing more of because of climate change, you are in a better position in every way to protect your baby from any kind of catastrophe, like when we had the formula crisis, and it was really hard for women in America, probably in Jamaica, to get formula. Well, if you're breastfeeding, of course, that's not an issue, but say there's a flood and there's a, boil water notice, but your electricity has gone out. You can't boil water for the formula, but your milk is sterile. And okay, so you're protecting your baby and yourself. And we'll go into a little bit more about how the formula industry is very energy intensive from beginning, raising the cows, to the end, till we get it. And so this is a way that we can also make a huge impact on our own carbon footprint from the moment our babies are born. And we can set an amazing example that will really ensure their health and safety by reducing those carbon impacts, or carbon footprint.
Right. Okay, great. And I believe that, just the mention of reducing or carbon footprint, and in the event of climate change related events such as excessive flooding or even droughts, those are some real environmental impacts upon a breastfeeding mother and her child, right? And it leads into the next question. What are the environmental and even climate impacts of formula feeding compared to breastfeeding? And I know you kind of touched on some of it just now when you spoke about how sterile breastfeeding is compared to formula feeding, but it can just touch on that a little for Catherine.
Right. So The production of commercial milk formula, and it's mainly produced by cows, although we do have a little bit from goats. They're both ruminating animals, so they have at least 2, sometimes 4 stomachs, so they belch a lot, and they produce methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. It's 28 times more potent than the most common one that we talk about, CO2. So it's a big industry. It's billions of dollars, $55 billion, the formula industry. So they, as I said, they use a lot of energy. And so just producing 1 kilo, that's 2.2 pounds for us Americans. I think you guys are on the metric system. It's a better system. So just 1 kilo of formula makes between 8 and 14 kilograms of CO2. And that's about what it takes to drive a car for 35 miles. So you can really reduce that, and by just breastfeeding. And so food production is a big greenhouse gas producer, and it accounts for 20 to 30% of global greenhouse gases. And so livestock, where the lion's share of that livestock is cattle and cows for milk and for meat, that makes up almost 15% of global greenhouse gases. And so that's a lot. And so in tropical regions, like in Jamaica, and South Florida is considered tropical, they need more water and more feed to produce. So it's harder to produce milk and meat, bigger mass of meat, in our climates. So it's even more draining on our economies to be consuming a lot of milk and meat. So that is one reason. And so I touched on them being ruminators. And so that this methane escapes into the atmosphere and acts like an extra blanket around the earth, warming our earth and causing all these weather changes of drought and then high precipitation and hurricanes. And and extreme heat. But so that's one way, but also when you transport the milk to the factory to process formula, and that's a highly processed food, that you transport it with trucks that burn gasoline and release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And then in the plant, when they're made, takes a lot of energy, electricity to extract the water from the milk and dry it. And then, and there's a lot of water involved with the chemical process in that manufacturing. Then there's a lot of plastic, a lot of paper, and a lot of metal. 86,000 tons of metal go into landfills that produce more methane. So it's just like this circular effect that all leads to producing more greenhouse gases and making our world warmer. Also, in order to have room for cows, we clear cut land so that they have room and they can graze. And that takes away one of our biggest carbon sinks, trees and shrubs, and that turn CO2 into oxygen again. So in every step of the process, from the time cows are born until the time we are making the formula, heating up the water that uses energy, because we have to boil the water. Formula is not sterile. To put it into the bottle for the baby, we are constantly using energy and resources that are only contributing to the climate crisis. So it's almost, breastfeeding is almost zero emissions. So you do need to eat more food, about 500 calories more. And you do need to definitely, ladies, especially in this extreme heat, drink a lot of water. But you are still really, yay, Candice has her cup right there. You're still really making a small dent in greenhouse gas emissions compared to formula. So.
Okay. Anything to add to that, Sim?
So I hear what Catherine is saying in terms of the whole process of formula, but one of the concerns that I've had, where you see if you're directly breastfeeding, all good and fine, but then I think, and let me be careful in how I say this, I think that so many other industries have decided to come into play and prey on moms because, you know, as a mom, you want to get everything right. It needs to be perfect. So the government has a very important role to play when it comes down to things like maternity leave, paternity leave, and policies in that regard, because when you're directly breastfeeding, fine, you are reducing your carbon footprint. But when you have to go back to work and then you have to think about pumping and storing the breast milk, let's not begin to talk about how many bags we have to use, the plastic bags that we have to use to store the breast milk. I remember my first breastfeeding journey, how many bags I threw away. Clearly, I was not as educated on climate change then, but that's a lot of plastic bags. I mean, now they do have reusable containers that they're using to store the breast milk, and then you still have to go ahead and use your bottle warmer to go ahead and warm that milk. So even though you're breastfeeding, that takes on a whole different aspect when it comes down to storage that you have to realize contributes to that as well. So while you're still breastfeeding, there is another aspect of it that is still contributing to it. So it's like, unless it is that we do come back down to what the way nature intended it to say, you know, you're directly breastfeeding, you're spending time with your children based on, of course, all conditions being equal, because as Catherine would have said before, there are so many different factors that might not enable a woman to do such in terms of breastfeeding, whatever might be the case. But as much as we're able to support it, we have to keep in mind that we have to do our part, and as you said, government and policies in order to enable that, because all of us, every single thing adds up, and one person can make a difference. You know, Candice and I were talking about it earlier. It has to be a collaborative effort.
Yeah.
So that is really where my concern lies, where, you know, you intend that direct breastfeeding, but all of the other factors with all of the other industries, and of course, you know, the diaper industry is a whole different conversation. But yes.
With a lot of microplastics and pollution and garbage pile up. Oh, yeah. All right. You know, we've had about 20-ish minutes elapsed so far, and believe it or not, so much has come out of what has been shared. You know, first of all, we've highlighted how breastfeeding and climate change and climate resilience kind of interconnect. We've identified what exactly breastfeeding is, the importance of breastfeeding to mom and child. We've also spoken about the environmental impacts of formula feeding as opposed to breastfeeding. And Catherine, you have touched on the extraction and manufacturing side of not breastfeeding, but more of the formula feeding. You know, we talk about the environment and how the production includes cows and transportation and water use and electricity use and all of that intertwined. I wanted, though, for us to, before we talk about what does it all mean for us in the end, like how can we either continue to ensure that, you know, there's some amount of sustainability or even more encouragement of breastfeeding, at least for moms who can breastfeed, because we know that not every mom can breastfeed for a myriad of reasons, right? But how does breastfeeding by itself contribute to climate change mitigation as best as it can, of course, and sustainability efforts?
Who do you want to take on that?
Same? Yeah.
I think she has more information. I think I can back up, you know, whatever she says in terms of the breastfeeding aspect. But when it comes on to the climate, I think she has it down packed in that regard.
Well, I'm sure together we'll cover the bases. So yeah, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but you know, breastfeeding, you don't use nearly as much water, right? And there's not as much waste, not just paper and metal and plastic, but also
electricity,
milk waste. So your baby tells you, I've had enough. And no, there's hardly anything you can do when your baby is finished breastfeeding. It doesn't want any more, and you don't waste it. That's it. But that doesn't happen with formula feeding. There's a lot of overproduction because it's hard to know, and then you have to make new if that's been left out. But you have a constant supply so that if there's an evacuation because of a hurricane, you don't need to be dependent on anyone else to feed your baby than yourself. You've got your formula there. You don't have to be worried, does the shelter have formula? Do I have to drag formula with? So there's no waste. And there's, so not only at the production is there less, you're not using all the water and the land resources, but when you're breastfeeding your baby, you're using less resources there, and you don't need to sterilize the water or anything. Another thing that it does is when we breastfeed, it does reduce our fertility. And any gynecologist will tell you it's good to at least be on the mini pill while you're breastfeeding to cover that. But it suppresses ovulation, and it helps space out pregnancies, and it helps we don't have our periods. So we don't need any of those hygienic aids, tampons or napkins or whatever that we would normally use that really are not good for the environment. They don't biodegrade very much. They take a lot of energy to make. So that's another thing that we're doing when we're breastfeeding, especially over longer periods of time. I only breastfed my first child for a year. The second one, she just never wanted to stop. Finally, I just said, hey, I want my body back, but so the longer you breastfeed, the better it really is for mom and baby, even if you're supplementing a lot with food, other food. So also it reduces food waste because the baby learns to sort of take command of her appetite that way, and they know how to gauge their hunger a little bit better, I think. And there are not so many studies to show that, but I would love to see more. So those are just a few things, and I know we can add on. So please hop in if I forgot anything.
Before you go, Simeca, when Catherine mentioned ovulation, I was reading something else. The title of it, Breastfeeding Can Help Tackle, let me tell you exactly what it says. Breastfeeding can help tackle climate crisis, but it's on governments, not moms, to save the world, right? And where is it? It says that, I lost it. Oh, right. It says, under environmental cost, as one of the factors, breastfeeding suppresses ovulation, and in so doing, it helps to reduce family sizes and it keeps families healthier, which can further protect the impact of humanity's impact on the Earth's resources. So that's essentially just a shortened way of summing up what you just said, Catherine. And then, of course, breastfeeding contributes to lower carbon dioxide equivalents being released in the air, but we already spoke about that. Simeca, you had something to include?
Right. So what I have to say goes back to the society undermining the breastfeeding relationship between the mother and the child, because when we decide to tell the mom that she's not making enough, or have her, second guess her ability to produce enough for her child, meaning you do have cases where it is true, but more times than not, based on my experience, the mother is more than capable of producing enough milk for her child. But then we have everybody else, the grandparents, the medical professionals, telling the mom that she's not able to produce enough, because of course they are all a part of the whatever it is that the formula industry wants us to believe. And then with that, even when you go into unnecessary supplementation, that actually affects the whole ovulation process, because that an ovulation occurs as a result of exclusive breastfeeding. So at any point in time, you are supplementing with anything else, whether it be formula or other foods before the baby should actually be getting the other foods. Then you interrupt that process and then the periods actually start. So it really has to be that exclusive process, because I've heard from so many gynecologists that they have had mothers come back at their 6-week visit and are pregnant again. And when you try to figure out, you know, what's the process, there was no period, so you should not be fertile at this point in time. Then when you dig deeper, you realize that, okay, this mom was supplementing, it wasn't necessarily exclusive breastfeeding. So we actually also have to keep that in mind. And then one of the things that tends to happen during these the hurricane season, you know, they always have persons talking about disaster preparedness or disaster management. This is actually when the formula companies come down in full force, because they want you to believe that, okay, we are going to stock you up with extra. So whatever it is that they're having expiring, they tend to come to the houses and they tend to give, once they know, because we have the whole marketing aspect. Once you've signed on to a pregnancy page or a new mom page, they automatically target you. They know your address and you'll just see a box of formula at your doorstep, and they tend to offload what it is that they have expiring, because they want you to believe that you need to have formula in excess, so that if a disaster does strike, you have supply to supply your baby. But even societies like the La Leche League will tell you that the breast milk, as Catherine would have explained before, is you have it right there. There's nothing else that you need to do. So whatever happens, once you're there, once your baby's there with you, that is the best source. You don't need to do anything else. You don't need to heat anything up. You don't need to have any bottle. You don't need to worry about electricity to store anything, even though they would have you believe, because from day one I have mothers saying to me, when do I need to start pumping? You don't need to start pumping unless you're going to go back to work like immediately, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's a matter of us not undermining the mother's ability to believe that she can. It really starts from there. Like, really, there are medical reasons why you can't, but if we empower her and have her believe that from day one you can, it makes that much more of a difference. And empowerment not only comes from telling her that she can, but also creating the environment to support that ability.
You know, when you mention empowerment, I recently wrote 2 stories about climate change and the disabled community. And one of the main points that stood out, I also did an Instagram live, me, on the same topic. One of the things that came out is the whole point of empowerment, you know, within the climate change space. In order to empower whichever vulnerable group of people, you have to facilitate the space to allow them to build their resilience, instead of them depending on Tom, Dick, and Harry to give the information to them, to give them whatever tools and resources that they need, you know. And I don't want it to be a situation where we are isolating both topics, because though both topics can stand on their own, they also do come together and intertwine and interconnect, because, you know, they're not, what's the phrase, mutually exclusive. They work together, you know, they do work together. And I have a question that wasn't shared with you ladies. I'm sure I know the answer, but I still want to hear you respond. Do you think breastfeeding mothers and their newborns are a vulnerable group, especially as it relates to climate change issues and climate change events? And if so, why? Why do you think so?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm trying to find some statistics that I had jotted down, but I think so children are the most at risk when it comes to vulnerability to climate impacts. That's famine. This is worldwide. That's famine, drought, you know, being hurt in tornadoes and hurricanes and things like that. And so they are very much at risk. So here's the statistic. So they bear about 88% of the increased burden. Children do. And of course, pregnant women do as well, especially when it comes to extreme heat. So there was a big study done in 2020 by Bruce Bakar and his colleagues that showed a relationship between exposure to heat and air pollution in pregnant women and preterm birth, low birth weight, and stillborn babies. So we know that pregnant women are very much at risk. And one of the things that makes human beings vulnerable to heat is dehydration. We often succumb when someone dies of heat. It's often because of dehydration and also an internal core temperature that's elevated so that their internal organs stop functioning and break down. But dehydration is key to that. So staying hydrated is important, and you can actually help keep your baby hydrated when you have that constant communication and that need to breastfeed. You feel the need. You know, you will remember more frequently to give proper amounts of liquid to the baby through your breast milk. So that is a very important part of building resilience as an individual to climate change and protecting your baby, because children do often get dehydrated. You know, yeah. I'll let you all add to that.
Simeca.
Of course, we're so vulnerable. We want to do it right. And we want to take the advice from everybody, even though we can't. And not all the advice is good advice. And I actually just wanted to make a point here where I'm not sure if you experience it where you are, Catherine, but especially in a climate like Jamaica, tropical climate like Jamaica, you have persons saying you need to give the baby water. Do you experience that as well?
That you need to give the baby water. Yeah. Also, the older they get, they do. Yeah.
Well, we hear from day one, they will tell you that the baby needs water, the baby is thirsty, the time is hot, you need to give the baby water. And no matter how we try to explain to them that the baby doesn't need any water.
Oh, okay. I get what you're saying.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was saying. They know what they need.
Right. So they don't need anything except for the breast milk. And of course, if you're giving them formula without added water for the first 6 months, I mean, our bodies are so amazing. The breast milk comes in two parts, as you would know, the foremilk and the hind milk. And when the baby is thirsty, they feed more frequently for a shorter period of time because they're trying to quench their thirst from the foremilk. And because what I find, because breast milk is so understudied and understood, because we know more about formula and we can control formula in terms of amounts and understand, we are more likely to lean towards it because it's manufactured, it's formula, you understand it, it's processed. And I keep saying it's the first processed food, first ultra processed foods that we are introduced to, and then there's a whole cascade from there. But yes, we are more vulnerable because we just want to do it right. And I think the more we become educated and informed, then we are better able to make informed and better decisions.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those valid points, ladies. The reason I asked the question of if mothers, newborn moms and their babies are a vulnerable group is because I wanted to just interject climate justice in the conversation, right? Climate justice in general is described as ensuring representation and inclusion and protection of the rights of vulnerable groups. And when people think of what vulnerable groups are, they automatically lean towards the elderly, the disabled groups. But I really don't think many persons think newborn moms and their babies are as vulnerable as the groups that I've mentioned before. But in truth, they are. And when we talk about climate change events such as droughts, flooding, more impactful storms, whether it be a tornado or a hurricane or a typhoon, wherever you are in the world, those events can negatively impact moms and their babies. When we look at those things, we have to consider, will water be available? And if water is available, will the water be clean? Because water scarcity isn't just about no water in your pipes or no stored water. It's also when you do have water in your pipes, but it's not clean water that you're getting. And then, as you mentioned, Catherine, the heat, we live in a tropical climate, so sometimes we feel hot, we feel the humidity, and we kind of sidestep it or brush it to the side and say, oh, this is normal for us, we're used to it. But when you check the figures and you check the facts, it's not the normal type of heat that our parents, Simeca, you and our parents would have experienced however long ago. And Catherine, imagine for your parents, it has gotten progressively worse. And this year it was announced, I think it was in June, that we are no longer in the realm of global warming. We are in the realm of global boiling. So it shows you that temperatures are rising. And with rising temperatures, we have the extremes of everything with the storms, the floods, the droughts, and all of that. And it also impacts mothers and their babies. How will they breastfeed? If they can't breastfeed and they have to depend on formula, how are they going to get to the formula with issues such as formula shortage, no water, and all of those things, right? We have so much to talk about. Oh my gosh, because I sent you so many questions, but we're winding down. So I'm going to just touch on our last two questions. Before I do that though, I just want to comment on what I think is the purity of this conversation. We're talking about breastfeeding and newborn moms and their babies. Right now, as we speak, Simeca is breastfeeding her newborn baby. Cookie Princess is what I call her. And we're also recording this in Breastfeeding Week within Jamaica. Yes, there is World Breastfeeding Week, but in Jamaica right now, this specific week is Breastfeeding Week. And I did not plan it, by the way. It just happened organically. It was Simeca who said to me, oh, that week or that day is great. So when I was planning all of this, she said, oh, perfect, it's Breastfeeding Week. So it's just so pure. In any event, let's move on to the questions, the last questions, right? Are there policies or initiatives in place in both the Jamaican aspect, Simeca, and the Floridian aspect, Catherine, to encourage breastfeeding as a means to combat climate change? And before you respond, I'm aware from a Jamaican perspective that breastfeeding is kind of taboo, not sure how exactly it is in the States, Catherine, but I know here the woman's body is sexualized. So if a mother wants to breastfeed her child and she's in public, the Jamaican phrase is hell on powder house. How dare you take out your breast in public? Nobody wants to see your breast. But the mother is literally providing nutrition to her child, and it's a problem. However, if a woman decides to dress scantily, there may be a problem, but it won't be as much of a problem as a mother wanting to breastfeed. In any event, Simeca, you can go ahead first.
So, what policies do we have in place? We don't. So you see, and Catherine can expound on them because of the space that I'm in, I'm aware of the fact that there are pumping laws, there are breastfeeding laws, so that nobody should be, I think it's probably different by state though. Nobody should be able to tell you that, no, you can't breastfeed. People will taunt you and tease you and make you feel uncomfortable, but the law should say you can't tell them they can't, and workplaces should allow them to pump. In Jamaica, we're getting there, is what I should say. What we have done recently is we moved maternity leave from 2 months paid and 1 month unpaid to 3 months mandatory paid. And that's been since December of last year. And then we also instituted paternity leave for 20 working days, which gives you the supportive environment that you need. With relation to workplaces needing to have a lactation room or allow you to pump, we don't have any of that. What I can say though is that breastfeeding in public, that's a whole different experience and a whole different ball game. What I will say is that my husband prefers me to be very private. He doesn't want me to pop out my breast in public, which I can understand. You don't want your goods all over the place. So when I'm out in public, I try my best to cover up, but it really shouldn't have to be that case. But as you have said, our bodies have become sexualized, so you're not associating breastfeeding with, as you said, nourishing your baby. However, I have been in places both now and in the past with my son where I'd be sitting there and I'd be shushing the baby so that the baby can be quiet and know that the baby is hungry. But for want of not being ashamed or embarrassed to pop my breast out in public, you'll have people that will say, take out the breast and feed the baby. They are encouraging you, that they know that's what the child wants. So we do actually have that encouraging environment in Jamaica where even though it is taboo, persons do understand that that is the way babies are fed. So by all means, go ahead and feed the baby. But still, we want you to do it in a modest way. So I always make sure that I have my little receiver and cover up. But in terms of laws and policies outside of maternity leave and paternity leave, we do have the Infant and Young Child Feeding Committee, which I'm a part of. And it's, let's just say it's a work in progress. I think maternal and child health has been a very long road advocating for that to get any sort of, importance or significance in the whole realm. But we have a very long way to go, to be honest.
And to add to that very long way to go, there is no explicit direction towards climate resiliency. It's just mostly about workplace and okay. All right. Catherine.
I don't think we have made that connection any at all. I don't think we have made that connection between breastfeeding and climate any at all.
Okay. All right, Catherine.
Well, Candice, talking with you and meeting with you has been really great, because even though I'm such an advocate for breastfeeding and child and maternal and child health and climate action, I have not really delved into specific policy issues that connect both climate and breastfeeding in particular. So you've really opened up a whole new area of interest. But that said, just to expand a little bit on it, and this is for anybody, anywhere, in any country, ways that you can advocate. And the older I get, I'm getting older, I realize advocacy is something that every single one of us can do in different ways. So at the local level, advocating is great. Even in the clinic where you go to prenatal appointments or afterwards, say, do you have a doula? Is there a doula who can help me? Or is there, do you have an IBCLC or a lactation consultant? Does your OB really specialize in lactation? Saying things like that send signals to the health system that is important to mothers, and that's an area they need to address, number one. And number two, then you can advocate at the local level or with other like foundations. Here in South Florida, the Health Foundation of South Florida is really supporting Black maternal health issues by funding and funding education for these support systems for pregnant women and infants. So funding education of IBCLCs and continuing education. I think that's the first one. Then another one, we already touched on it, is paid parental leave. Sounds like Jamaica is much further along as a nation in really mandatory comprehensive parental leave. So that's one thing, because really we all know that you're more likely to continue breastfeeding if you've successfully initiated breastfeeding. And so to make that easier for parents, and dads are more involved. There are studies that show dads are more involved as parents if the moms are breastfeeding. So it's good for everybody. And that just sets the stage, the parental leave, and then advocating for lactation rights in the workplace, breaks and a space where you can safely extract or use a breast pump, or you can bring your baby to breastfeed in a break, are great things to advocate for. And even if it isn't a law, what we did at the Alabama Breastfeeding Committee, where I was before we moved to Florida 5 years ago, is we went around and we put a sticker in businesses' windows saying they supported breastfeeding, both for their workers and for if they were a restaurant, for their guests and hotels. And so that was really great. They could put it on their website, and it was like a little badge of, we get you, women. And that says a lot. And then lastly, I really have to mention, because this is key, Senator Ed Markey and Representative Lauren Underwood have for quite a few years supported something called the Protecting Moms and Babies Against Climate Change Act. And it's part of a bigger momnibus package called the Black Maternal Momnibus Act. So in that, there are provisions that are really all-encompassing, that really can make those connections between the vulnerability of infants and pregnant women and climate. So you can Google it and follow them if you're in the US. Advocating with your representative, giving them a call or sending them an email, it really does matter. I didn't realize it till I started doing it. So I'm sure in Jamaica it's the same way. So there are lots of ways, but honing in on breastfeeding and climate impacts and how we can do our part, Candice, that's brilliant. You've really highlighted an important area that we can all work on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. And I think that's such a great way to wrap up, a great way to end. Before we can even truly look at the topic or the conversation, we need to first acknowledge that where climate change or the climate change crisis is concerned, or the climate crisis is concerned, we need to acknowledge breastfeeding mothers and their babies as a part of the vulnerable community. And then from there, we hone in on how climate change events impact breastfeeding mothers and their babies. And from there, how we can build or help to build their resiliency and how we can mitigate against certain things, right? Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And you can follow up with Climate Tracker and all the work that's being done on their website at climatetracker.org. You can follow Climate Tracker on Instagram at Climate Tracker. And I believe on Twitter, it's at Climate Tracking.